criminals don't get too hung up on reason. They just keep killing.
Welcome back to Arthouse Garage, the new horror film In a Violent Nature, released this month, and it's been making some waves among cinephiles and horror fans. It's the feature debut of writer-director Chris Nash, and the story focuses on a mysterious resurrected figure that emerges in the woods after some teenagers steal a gold necklace from his tomb. What follows is a unique and gruesome slasher movie with a lot of creativity on display. Joining me to discuss the film today is my friend, the one and only Michael J. Dougherty. He's a filmmaker, and he helped start the LA chapter of the Real Abilities Film Festival. He's also a rather prolific film writer. You can find his work on social media and medium.com. Michael, welcome back to the show, and how are you?
Howdy, campers. Doing all right.
This is an instance when you reached out to me and said, "Hey, I have some thoughts about a movie I want to get out," and so
one or two.
Well, let's, by all means. It's great when other people plan my podcast for me. I don't have to do anything. Okay. Just turn on the microphone. But we are going to talk about In a Violent Nature. I like to, bring in other films to the podcast, like just fun discussion things as I can. So I'm trying to do these little icebreakers. And as this is a very violent movie, which content warning, I think, for violent, because we're going to talk about the violence of it. And then along with that, I thought I might open by asking you, what is the most violent film that you've ever seen? Or is there a violent moment from a movie like in your youth that really made an impact on you?
Yes. So, and I've been thinking about this ever since you put it to me. So it's been hours, and there have been dozens of movies that have been sort of running through my mind. What do I talk about? But I thought of two things.
I have a list of about 5 or 6 brief things, so take your
time. I can bounce off of that too. But the scariest movie ever made, as far as I'm concerned, is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Tobe Hooper's movie, which has just turned 50 this year, or will be 50 this year.
50, that's wild.
50 years old. But the interesting thing about it is that it is almost entirely bloodless. But the movie itself is so sick and sickening and so violent just in the way that it's told, that you're left with a lot to sort of wash off in the shower. And to a great extent, I think the ending of in a violent nature, or at least the last like 15 minutes or so, 10 minutes, owes a lot to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I'll get why that I don't think that entirely works when we're down the line. So there's a little preview for you. But in terms of like violent scenes, it's not a horror movie, but it had a seismic effect on me, which is Paul Verhoeven's Total Recall with Arnold Schwarzenegger, which came out in 1990, I think. And spoiler alert for the 30-year-old movie, but there's a moment where Schwarzenegger, who's playing this construction worker who may or may not be a secret agent, who's being pursued by other agents who are, and then he has to get to Mars, and it's a science fiction film. But Paul Verhoeven has a really twisted, sick sense of humor. He also did RoboCop, which is one of my all-time favorite movies. And there's a moment where Schwarzenegger is trying to escape up this escalator, and he knocks a guy out of the way, and the guy ends up getting shot. And they have the bad guys have machine guns, and Schwarzenegger ends up picking this guy's body up and using him as a human shield. And he gets like just blown to pieces. And it's very, 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 very graphic. and it's so over the top that now I can kind of like giggle at it in like a twisted kind of way. But I remember seeing that when I was like 11 or 12 years old at a sleepover, and not being able to put it down.
Yeah.
I mean, it had that much of an effect on me, and I don't like guns in any way, shape, or form. I won't even write them into my own screenplays, and I'm a screenwriter, and I tend to write very dark and violent things. But the idea of someone just being riddled with bullets and the squibs going off at a young age really, really had an effect on me. And another one real quick, again, it's a spoiler for the movie Aliens with Sigourney Weaver, James Cameron's movie. There's a moment where a character gets ripped in half by the alien queen, and you see their guts sort of like hanging out of them. You've seen Alien?
I actually haven't seen Aliens, but
Oh,
I know quite a lot about it. Like I've heard about this moment.
so and they did it with like milk and yogurt. But that's, to me, just that idea. I mean, graphically, it's so sickening.
Mm.
That I still have problems eating like oatmeal at this point
Yeah.
every time I think about that. But so that's the type of thing where like that it's not real because it's so over the top, and that speaks to some of the things that I like about in a violent nature is it's so gonzo.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if it's done effectively, it can really, really get to you.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about that too, and I was gonna say something about this in a minute, but yeah, there's like, why are there some things that are over the top violent? I thought about like Kill Bill Volume 1, which, there's all this slicing and all this blood splurting. It doesn't really look real, and it doesn't hit me in the same way that the one that popped in my head when I first thought of this was in the movie 28 Days Later, zombie movie, but the kill I'm thinking of is it's a thumbs into eyes moment, and like that, like that's like the toughest thing for me, eye things. So like that, which, yeah, so like Kill Bill being, you know, gallons of blood, but it doesn't look real. And then 28 Days Later, this like really graphic, real feeling moment that was much more upsetting. So yeah, I was just thinking about that. A few other things that I thought of. The movie Green Room. There's a moment when
Mhm.
somebody's arm gets mangled, and God, it's so hard to watch. And then the movie Raw. I thought that's the one that just sticks out as like really turned my stomach. Um, which is it's a cannibal movie, but it's quite violent as well. And I think in that one too, it feels pretty grounded the way like the camera is moving and stuff. Um, but then yeah, I also was thinking about like, so in a violent nature, we're going to talk more about extremely violent, over the top, as you said. Um, but it's not quite on the level of something like I was thinking, as I was thinking about like violence in movies in general. There's a certain um, thrill seeking, like I was thinking about things like Terrifier 2. It was a big deal a couple of years ago for just being like extremely graphically violent. I did not watch it. I read a description and I was like, maybe I'll go see this, and I was like, maybe I won't go see it.
There's a scene in a bedroom that goes on for a few minutes that's like, oh, okay, we're doing that now.
Yeah. So I don't feel like this is on that level. And I was thinking about too, like when Saw came out, there was like a torture porn thing, and like Hostel was a big deal. And so there was like a level of like, how far can I watch for bragging rights, or like there is some sort of a thrill of gross out kind of moments. The only thing I've really seen in that realm is in high school I watched The Human Centipede. Don't recommend.
Mhm.
Which actually it's less violent than it's just disgusting. But anyway, but it was absolutely just like the bros are gonna go watch this gross movie and talk about it, kind of thing. But yeah, so those are some of the moments that I thought of, some of the movies that I thought of. I also thought about Alien, the first Alien, the
Of
just
course.
coming, yeah, coming out of a person. It was, I saw it. I wasn't like a kid, but I was a teenager, and that that shook me. When you mentioned the riddled with gunshots, I thought about the ending of Bonnie and Clyde, actually, which is like
Mm.
overall that movie is like pretty tame until that moment. As I recall, I haven't seen it in years, but the big shooting scene at the end, which is yeah, tough to watch. But yeah, so
Well,
go ahead.
it makes me, because I was thinking about this question about
Yeah.
violence in movies and examples and things like that. And I think it has to do with context
Hmm.
and the way that things are pitched, because there may be the same amount of bullets used on Bonnie and Clyde as there were on that poor soul on the escalator
Yeah.
in Total Recall. But Paul Verhoeven is going for something that's so over the top that you have to laugh.
Mm.
Whereas um, Arthur Penn's assertion back then was that he wanted to evoke the Kennedy assassination
Mm.
and Kennedy getting his head blown off. So there's something still just as violent, but there's something very, very serious in terms of the intention.
Yeah.
And I always sort of wrestle with that. Is like, is there a line where you can go too far? And I don't necessarily think that there is by my for my money, but I can see why certain people wouldn't be into something like a Serbian film,
Hmm.
because
I
it's
haven't watched it.
so disgusting and graphic, but it's so serious
Mm.
that like there's no pleasure in all the squibs going off.
Yeah. Yeah. So as I was thinking about myself as a moviegoer, I don't think I'm like the horror thrill seeker that, or at least like the gore thrill seeker that maybe in high school I thought I might become. But I was like, I don't think that's my spill. So like, In a Violent Nature is a movie that I don't know. It kind of toes the line in a way that I thought was interesting, where it's not like Carnival Ride. You know, we're just gonna have a gleeful time killing these people, but a little bit. But the tone of it is more serious than that. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting movie. And yeah, anything else about like violence in movies generally before we get into this particular film?
Um, well, it's also curious to me how um, a movie where someone's getting their arms cut off or their head blown off or their a hole ripped through their chest can get an R rating, but if a
Mm,
man takes his pants off or a woman takes her shirt off, everybody loses their minds.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And I there's a level of hypocrisy there,
yeah,
and it's so American. Like, we
yeah,
just love our violence, and we've got it sort of in our DNA that we need to defend each other or defend ourselves and do so violently. But yet we're also puritanical, so
yeah.
sex is really scary. And it's not that I want to discourage people taking violence out of it. I'm not prudish in that way, but I think we've got to work on the balance of things
Yeah.
a little more, because there isn't a moment that I took seriously um in Violent Nature, but the very end, that final scene wants you to take it
Hmm.
seriously in a way that was incongruous to me. And I thought, well, this is part of the problem, is that the intention is one thing. It's paying tribute to 70s and 80s slasher films, but he wants to make this deeper point. And I don't disagree with the deeper point that he's pushing at, but they don't for me didn't mix well.
Hmm.
And that's where it can get sort of gummed up,
Yeah.
uh, where a filmmaker will put an excessive amount of violence in something, but there's no sort of joy in possibly escaping it,
Hmm.
or just joy in the creativity of how these
Hmm.
things get made, if you know anything about
Yeah.
movies and special effects. um and I just feel like we've got to get to a point where we know exactly why we are intending to do what we do as creatively. Because if it's well thought out, then I don't necessarily see a limit.
Mhm.
But then again, like I said, it's all intention.
Yeah. Yeah, that's just a quick word about what you said about like sex versus violence and that double standard. Nowhere was that more obvious than growing up in the evangelical church, which I've talked about quite a bit in the podcast. But like, oh, we can all go watch Lord of the Rings at a very young age, even though there's like a monster at one point that orcs' entrails are flying. It's like it's pretty violent, you know. But if there's like a whisper of cleavage, it's like no, you have to be 25 plus before you can see that. So yeah, it's such a double standard. I think you're right. It's kind of an American thing, but um, yeah. So you're getting at some of your ideas there on In a Violent Nature, and I want to get into all of that briefly. Are there any, just like from a filmmaking standpoint, are there things that stuck out to you, or stood out to you? Is the word I was looking for, in a good or a bad way about this film?
In a good way. Well, a lot of people are saying this is like what if Terrence Malick made a horror film, which I don't agree with at all. I think what if Gus Van Sant made another horror film. Because I don't know if have you seen Jerry or
I haven't.
Last Days?
No, but I've seen. Hold on, something. You can go ahead.
Elephant also.
No, I guess I'm thinking of a different filmmaker.
So those are his really contemplative, like people walking around seemingly doing nothing.
Mm,
And oftentimes you're actually following right behind them.
much like
And
most of this movie.
yeah, and it's deliberately kind of pushing the limit of tedium. But
Yeah.
I I like the violence, and I can easily separate it out. But I kind of really liked just walking around in the woods with this
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah, I
It was
agree.
it was just really pleasant, and I liked the sounds and
Hmm.
the crunching of the leaves under his feet. And I thought, you know what, this isn't like Bellatar level, like boiling potatoes for 10 minutes. Like
Yeah.
it's not that like art prankish.
Hmm.
But there was a part I was like, yeah, I could dig it. And plus I get a kind of kick when it frustrates other people in the theater, which most certainly was doing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a
Um,
little bit on a slow cinema wavelength. Not
yeah,
quite there, but yeah, it's
it's walking towards it.
yeah.
And so and there's a logic to it as well, because in those horror movies from the 80s, like Jason, he would end up in all of these spots, and you'd be wondering, like, how did he get
Yeah.
there? And of course, it's because he walked. And I like that, the kind of like sort of like inside joke about that.
Hmm.
Um, and it doesn't hold through the whole movie. There's a bit of cheating that goes on, and I kind of wish, no, I wish it stayed in his
Hmm.
perspective. And there's a larger reason why I think it should, as we'll talk down the line.
Yeah.
So I really like that. um I'm always excited if a movie shows me something that I've never seen before, and this time it did, and it involved a woman doing yoga
Yep.
and a logging hook. And I've seen a lot of horror movies. I had never seen that before.
Yeah, that was pretty intense. That one got an audible reaction from me and some other people in the theater. Like, oh,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
yeah, um, yeah,
Um, those things I liked. The acting was not good,
yeah,
um, at all, really. Except that, like, you don't. That's almost part of the charm of these horror movies, is
mm,
that they're paying tribute to, is that like it's just they are expendable.
yeah,
But again, with what the point that they're trying to make in the end, I think it really would have required better actors to pull it all off.
yeah, yeah. That would be my complaint too. Is the acting and honestly, like the writing of a lot of the teenage dialogue just wasn't quite there. Could needed another pass maybe. But yeah, I appreciated a lot of things you said, like the camera work, all the following through the woods and the sound design of all that. I got through like half of the movie. I was like, I think, is there no music in this? I could be wrong about
Um,
that, but
None, it's
yeah,
just the song at the end.
just just like the sounds of the forest and some really creative camera work as far as like particular shots too. Um, but yeah, like it is just really thrilling. The moments when he's just walking and just people are just barely not seeing him. Like that is really fun, and I liked that about it. Um, there's one shot near the end, which it's in the middle of a kill, so I won't totally spoil it. But there's like an overhead shot outside the cabin that I thought was really well done, where he's pursuing somebody, um, and it ends violently. Um, and I think, yeah, as you were saying, like thinking about the practical effects of like, I think anytime I'm like starting to feel like, oh, this is a little upsetting, it's so violent, I just think about how do they do this, and like that creative exercise is more fun. But yeah, really, like how do they, you know, smash this guy's head, or the logging moment, like how do they pull that off practically is kind of fun to consider. Um, yeah, just like the tone and the pace of it, I thought was really uh, well, like confident throughout it, and it didn't. It was brave enough to not, you know, bring in the music or change the way the camera was working behind him the whole time and all of that. So yeah, I think get away from any thematic stuff. I appreciated this movie. I wouldn't say that I loved it. Um, stylistically or anything, but I was like, I'm glad that I've watched this. And then we're gonna get into some of the thematic stuff, which I kind of was like grasping at pieces of, and I was also thinking like, I wonder what Michael thought about this and that. So I can't wait to hear what you have to say about that. But um, yeah, so I guess from there, what about this film inspired you to write so much, and what stood out to you that you um, felt strongly about?
Well, so I wrote this piece called Beauty in the Beast, which I posted on Medium, so that's it's public, so y'all can
I'll
go,
link that out. Yeah.
yeah, you can all read that, and I appreciate if you want to follow me. Um, but initially, what had happened was I felt a kind of disconnect, and I think there's may have been deliberate between the serenity and then the extreme
Mm-hmm.
violence. Um, and liking both of those parts, but thinking that why is this not coming together for me? And the more that I sort of turned that over, the more other things started bubbling up from my psyche. Now, I've brought this up before, so I don't need to go like crazy down this path, but I was born with spina bifida. I've had 35, 36 surgeries over my lifetime, a number of them being brain surgeries. Like they've taken a power drill and a hacksaw to my skull. Like, I mean, I've seen what my body looks like falling apart, and I've
Mm-hmm.
seen a lot of blood and guts. Um, but horror movies have always been sort of comforting to me because I think, well, okay, it's not nearly as bad as having my head ripped off and then pulled through a hole in my body. So I got that going for me. Um, but there's another thing which I didn't climb onto when until much later, which is that so many of these horror movies, the monster has some sort of physical or mental challenge
Mm-hmm.
to them. And and you can go all the way back to silent cinema, where Thomas Edison made a version of Frankenstein, which is sort of like the granddaddy of all of this in terms of the intersection of disability and horror.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Todd Browning's masterpiece Freaks, which I hope we get to talk about in greater depth down the line. Um, there seems to be this inescapable connection with disability and horror, and it comes mostly from people who are not disabled. I mean, the makers of, I mean,
Yeah.
one really presumes, and that's always sort of stuck in my craw, and I think it's stuck in the craw of a lot of people. But at the same time, because I love horror movies, there's a part of me that thinks, "Oh no, but this is my genre. That's what this is."
Mm.
Is the horror of my growing up and the horror of the physical things that I had to go through are writ large, and they're put out in a way that's safe for me
Mm-hmm.
to deal with. And so what I've always sort of longed for, is, where do we get to the point where we can really examine why this is happening? And I mean, you take somebody like Jason, who had some sort of like developmental disability and disfigured and was bullied and then murdered as a result. You have Michael Myers, who's autistic for all intents and purposes. You have Freddy Krueger, who had facial differences because he's burned. Um, and but they never go into the psychology of what that all might mean.
Mm-hmm.
And for a brief moment in a violent nature, brings that up with these campers or the kids that are in the woods, um, feeling uncomfortable about what do we label this character, because they want to say retarded.
Yeah. They kind of hint at it almost in the script. Mm-hmm.
But then they stop, and then ableism is brought up, and I thought, okay, so there's that, and there's the fact that we're following this guy from his perspective for almost the entire movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh, this is what I have been waiting for. They're finally going to treat this like he is a full person. And the movie just seems to go out of its way not to do that.
Mm-hmm.
That it keeps reducing itself to just being a plain old slasher movie, like all the rest. And so that really, really got under my skin. And I think that's what motivated just to keep writing, because I don't I don't expect that a filmmaker has to satisfy every need that I have or desire that I want to see on screen, or want things explained. But if you're going to bring it up,
Yeah.
then you better have something to back it up.
Mm-hmm.
Because then I'm gonna have something to say. And that was the thing, is that, like, I what bothers me is not a terrible movie. What bothers me is is a bad movie that had every single bit of potential to be brilliant and great and genuinely like groundbreaking, and they missed the mark.
Yeah, I did have that thought too, because I said before we started recording that I didn't know whether you love this movie or didn't love the movie. I just knew that you wrote a lot about it. And so when we had that campfire scene where they're telling the story and hinting around the R word, and I was like, oh, this is actually a really great setup for this to be a cool ableism, indictment or something. And yeah, and then I got to the end, I was like, did I miss something, or did it just not ever do that? And yeah, so I had a similar feeling about it, and there's moments where it flirts with it a little bit, like when we finally, I guess we're gonna talk spoilers at this point a little bit. It's not really a spoiler, whatever. But the moment with the toy car, where he sits down, we finally see his face, and I thought, are we gonna have some like deeply human moment to endear us to him or something? And it just doesn't really do that. Um, but yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I would love to read more about the relationship between horror and disability. 'Cause I've thought about some of these things that you're saying, But as I'm just pondering it, I'm sure that there's scholarship and stuff about this, but how much like body horror is a popular thing, and like things happening to the body, and how that, you know, those fears can be manifest in someone like Michael Myers or whoever that is just like innately scary to, you know, an able-bodied person, that they look like me but there's something different, and like why is that a horrific thought to an able-bodied person? And yeah, it seems like there's potential to do something really creative in a movie along those lines. I haven't seen it, and I mean I'm not a horror expert, but
Well, I don't
yeah,
I don't want to I don't want to toot my own
no, go
horn.
for
Okay, thanks.
it.
Uh, the one screenplay that got me any attention, which is on the Blacklist
Hmm.
website, if you feel like looking up, is called No One Is Looking, and it was sort of my attempt to say, okay, this is a story that's basically about homicidal special needs kids,
Hmm.
and I was interested in the idea, well, where does this trope come from, and how do we sort of interrogate it,
Yeah.
and being very highfalutin about it. It's got a lot of exploding heads in it, and I'm happy for it to be just that. Um, but it is something that I would like, if I can ever make the damn thing.
Yeah.
I'd like to put that out there and see if people can see what I mean, because I know some people do, but it's there's it's so pervasive,
Hmm.
this connection between disability and horror, that the fact that it's not really being dealt with, and the fact that, like, Freaks, which came out in 1932, is sort of the beginning, the middle, and the end on
Hmm.
disability representation in a lot of ways, because nobody's bothered to push it in that direction.
Yeah.
And horror is always going to be, like, I think, the most accessible way to do it.
Hmm.
And like I said, it crept to the edge of the lookout, but it didn't push the body over
Yeah.
the edge.
So to speak. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Interesting. It's yeah. It is. It's such an interesting movie, and like it's. Um, I think when I first heard of it, I was like, oh, there's a lot of horror movies coming out this year, and I don't make a point to see all of them, but I heard enough buzz around this one. I was like, oh, I'll check it out, and then you had thoughts. I'm glad I watched it, and it has a lot of creative ideas. It's just uh, was so nearly perfect to do what you're talking about, and didn't do it. But um, yeah. Well, any other thoughts about In a Violent Nature before we wrap things up?
Oh yeah, no, I have tons.
Okay, go go go.
Well, the ending, we have to deal with the
Yeah, yeah.
ending.
Okay, so we probably should give a spoiler warning officially now, and talk about the very end. So go
Um,
for it.
so basically, Johnny, who's the name of the killer, has been hacking his way and smashing people's heads, and there is a final girl, as there usually is in these movies, and she ends up escaping and then running through the woods and getting her leg impaled on a branch, and then limping out of the woods onto a service road, where somebody happens to come by in a pickup truck, and then helps her escape for good. And she tells the story about how um, her brother got attacked by a bear. The woman who's driving
Yeah.
tells a story about how her brother got attacked by a bear, and but didn't get eaten, and that somehow this is a thing in nature, where some animals just go crazy and just kill for the sake of killing. But and just bring it back to the disability thing for a minute.
Hmm.
Um, and again, this is another thing that I've written about in another screenplay called Your Pet and You. Um, but it really, 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 really bugs me that they casually kind of draw a line between animals,
Hmm.
this guy with this
Yeah.
mental challenge. It was like, don't do that. Or if you're gonna do it, why is that seem acceptable to people?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but anyway, so what I think it's doing is it's taking the end of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, in which Marilyn Burns, the quote unquote hero of that movie, gets away with her soul just shredded by that experience, and it has this moment where she's in the back of a pickup truck screaming her head off, and it's like one of the great acting moments. Um, and then the movie's just over, and it's like, well, what would it be like if you actually had to follow that traumatized person for another 10-15 minutes? Except that the performance just doesn't doesn't it's like she's just sitting there, and I'm like, okay, I see what you're up to, movie, but
Hmm.
you're not actually doing what you think you're doing. Like, it's just does not have the kick that you wanted to have. But at the same time, when she stops to help, when the woman who's driving stops to help bind this woman's leg up because she's falling asleep, she's afraid she's going to bleed out, the woman starts begging her to keep going, because in these
Yeah.
movies, that's when the last moment that the killer will
Hmm.
just pop out, and it cuts to the woods for a little
A
bit,
long
and it
time. Yeah.
was unsettling
Yeah.
that he would be there, but he's not. Um, so that little bit worked. It was just that long stretch just wasn't doing what I thought that it should have been doing. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And I could see that she was going for like, I'm in shock or something, but it did. Yeah. I also found that a bit underwhelming, but I also was going to mention that the forest shot at the end I thought was well done, because I was on the edge of my seat for that little moment.
yeah.
But yeah. Yeah. The end. So is your understanding of the bear story that that was not a bear? Because he never actually saw the bear, right? It was Johnny. It was my understanding of that description.
Oh, that Johnny was her brother?
No, that Johnny was the attacker, not a bear as the attacker.
Oh,
That's what I thought, because she talks about all the animals that were destroyed and not eaten, right? Um, but I think you're right. Like the violent nature idea, like being not like being something that's in nature naturally, and so and with that, and like with the title of the film, you can see it's kind of trying to like examine um, our darker impulses. And actually, I thought that's where the movie was going to go when he first erupts from the ground, and then he goes and he sees the ranger having an argument with that farmer guy, and, and it gets very heated, right? And so I was like, oh, is this going to be like he's observing human nature in our worst moments, because we see them fighting, and then we do get bits of that where the teenagers are like being nasty to each other here and there. Um, it doesn't really fully explore that. It just kind of like shows that, and I guess in a way he's observing those things and then deciding to kill them because of it, or just for fun. And that's the other thing too, is it doesn't quite explain his bloodlust. I mean, I guess it's from the story of the people. See, that's why the ableism setup is so good, but it just didn't pay off. Is because the story, the ghost story, is that these people were abusing him, and so his spirit came back and ripped him to shreds. Um, 30 years ago or whatever. But it doesn't quite make a clear motivation for the present day stuff that's happening, whereas it could have, and that could have added to the thesis of ableism is bad kind of thing. But
es-
it just doesn't really do that.
especially because you have the scene with the electric wood splitter,
Yeah.
which is just plain sadistic.
Yeah.
And again, it's like I thought that was a really inventive use for that tool, and I was like, okay, I probably hadn't seen that before either. But it gave that character an element where I was like, but where's that coming from?
Yeah.
I mean, he's doing all of this because something very precious was taken from him, that it's connected to his mother, and it's the thing that will put him at peace. Like that's very clear and spelled out. And if okay, well that could be enough to garner at least a little bit of sympathy. But then you have that moment with the park ranger, and I'm like, what? And it goes on again for like this really long time. And it's like, oh, I cut off the arm, and now I have to cut off his head. And I was like, well, okay. And he's alive the whole time.
Yeah.
That it just it pushed it in a direction where I thought, what are we saying here? And again, if it were just a splatter movie where it's like we're just having a good time and we want to see a lot of heads exploding, that's one thing. But the movie clearly has it's clawing at deeper earth. And again, it's like, if okay, you're going to say these things, you're going to go out on a limb and do this, well, then you gotta follow through. And even if it's a question of like justification, whether I feel unsatisfied, that's fine. But the filmmaker has to know why things are happening. And I didn't get that sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about the beginning of the first Halloween movie, because we get the POV shot from, kid Michael Myers, who, as I recall, his, probably, autistic coded or whatever. And then it's because his sister's being sexually active that he like can't take it. And so there's like a prudishness kind of built into that. And so I was looking for that kind of thing in this movie, because it had flashes of that, but it was never clear. And like, so that's the other thing too, is like there's moments when like, oh, that person I think has the necklace, so I'm going to kill them. But it became a senseless kind of killing spree for anyone that was nearby. Yeah, and then as you mentioned, just the sadistic feeling of the wood chopper machine kill. Yeah.
And if they were gonna go down the like, let's explore the sex route, which again, it's like this is also like an intrinsic part of these types of movies, like and they ultimately end up being very conservative, because it's like they say, well, sex will make you die.
Yeah.
And so we live in an age where, at least we say online, that we're more accepting of fluidity and sexual practices and stuff like that. But what is it that at our very core still makes that all repellent on some level? And I was thinking, well, there's a brief moment where you see Johnny's arm through the hole in this woman's abdomen, and think, well, okay, now you're setting up a really rather brutal, rape image, and it doesn't do anything with it. And it's also it's attacking a gay person.
Yeah, I'd had that thought too. It was like, is this movie homophobic right now? I don't know. Because yeah, it is. There's something that like it seems like consistently we're punishing the people who have sex in movies, in horror movies like this, and it's like a tradition almost. Yeah. But yeah, I had that same thought. It's like we just find out that these two characters are queer and they're the next two to go, kind of thing.
And again, it's like, okay, if you want to do that, I don't object to the offing of these people. That's fine. But just know that if you're referencing this much history, you have to understand that history and why it is so fraught with problems, and you don't have to solve them. But if you're gonna go down an uncomfortable route like that, there should be something, at least in the mind of the people that made it, that, oh, there is a reason why
Yeah.
we're doing. We don't have to. I don't have to agree with it again, but there should be, and it just felt like mayhem for mayhem's sake, which
Yeah.
again, I'm fine in and of itself. But if you're pointing constantly at, I'm making a bigger point, don't you know, then they better come to play.
Yeah.
So
Totally agree. Trying to think if I have any other thoughts on this film. I don't think that I do. I was looking through my notebook, and I think that's about covers it.
why do you I wonder if the movie could have been entirely done through his point of view.
Yeah, it splits off to the final girl at the end there, and
But it even does it during the moments like the kill, so that you can better see things. Like,
oh yeah,
uh, um, which again, I get why they want the money shots to be there. But I it would have been a braver experiment if they had really been, dogmatic about keeping it from his perspective. And if people got annoyed and walked out, well, it wouldn't have been for everybody. I would have loved that. It would have just go for a walk in the woods with this guy.
yeah, yeah. I wondered if we would ever see his face. And of course we do in that moment, and then I do. I think the mask thing is pretty effective. Like that's a cool like design for the killer.
It is a cool thing, and but at the same time, he kind of looked like a giant minion
You're not wrong.
from those Despicable Me movies, and I kept waiting for him to say, do that Bob Aran type thing, but oh well, dare to dream.
Some the other day, I think the new Minions trailer or whatever is out, and they're playing tennis. And oh, is it they're remaking Challengers, but with Minions? I was like, they should do that with every movie. That would be way better than any of the Minions movies. Give us
Yeah.
Minions, Star Wars, Minions, Christmas Carol. Anyway.
Yeah, but Minions Challengers, where they have Minions having three ways. Yeah, good. I like where your head's at, man.
New fetish unlocked. Oh God. Well, anyway, that is In a Violent Nature, still in theaters now. Go see it and see if you agree or disagree with us. But yeah, I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing all your wonderful thoughts. As always, I will link to that piece and to your Medium page so that people can find your writing there. And I highly encourage people to do that.
Go read my stuff.
Yes, go read his stuff. It's very good. Anytime I read your writing, I'm like, man, I wish I could write. I just think that it clearly just flows from you in a way that I'm like impressed by. So
thank you. I appreciate that.
Well done. All right. Well, thank you so much again, and we will talk to you next time. And actually, speaking of, we're gonna finally finish that Aronofsky series very soon. Knock on wood.
Very soon. Let's do this. Been dying to talk about Mother for the past God knows how many years. So not been able to do this. I've only done it with a few people, but I need to get all of my thoughts out about the fact that Jennifer Lawrence is in close up for 62 minutes out of that entire movie. So let's do it.
I'm planning to watch it, I think, tomorrow. So I'll finally be ready. But yes. Well, thank you as always.
About God.
We'll talk about God. We'll talk about Noah as well in that episode. And yeah, until then, we will say bye-bye for now.
Thanks, man.